Well, I am a sociologist, and as a sociologist, I've spent the last 10 years studying how social institutions use psychotropic drugs. And for those who aren't familiar with this term, psychotropic drugs are prescription drugs that change brain chemistry and affect the central nervous system. They include tranquilizers, sedatives, antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs. They also include mood stabilizers as well. Growing numbers of children and adults regularly take psychotropic drugs to manage problems in living. Scientists don't know exactly how these drugs work on the brain, but we know that they do something to us. In particular, my research is focused on how psychotropic drugs work to prop up laws and policies that produce mass incarceration. I've begun to wonder and have been fixated on this question, could we hold 2.2 million people in the prison industrial complex without the use of these drugs as chemical restraints? So in the process of trying to figure that out, I began to encounter troubling patterns in the ways that other social institutions used psychotropic drugs, and these institutions are very similar to prisons in important ways. So not only was I concerned with how they used these drugs, I began to be concerned with why they used psychotropic drugs inside institutions. And here's what I found out. They can't help it. They are addicted. Our major social institutions have become addicted, reliant, dependent on psychotropic drugs to do what they do in our society. And this is a huge, hidden, and largely taken for granted problem that we have to confront. I'm mainly thinking about institutions that hold people in custody for periods of time. People live in them for periods of time. So think prisons, think nursing homes, think the military, think group homes for kids who are in foster care, think schools like universities. What these institutions share is you simply cannot just get up and leave. You're bound to them in certain ways. And the people who work in them also are bound to them. They're what sociologists call custodial institutions. They hold you in custody. And I think we've gotten to a point in our society where these institutions cannot do what we have given them the power to do if they did not have ready-made, taxpayer-funded access to a wide armory of brain-transforming drugs that magically make managing populations of people as easy as drinking a glass of water. I have to admit, it's kind of a counterintuitive idea, this idea that institutions can get high, like real fleshy people. You might think I'm a little high for even offering up this kind of claim in a situation like this, but it's really important to consider that we actually treat social institutions as persons in many important socially significant ways. We often use metaphors to describe institutions, metaphors that liken them to human bodies. They are sick or they are healthy. Institutions can grow, they can shrink. Institutions can be strong or they can be weak. Institutions can be born and they can die. So to me, it's not such a great rhetorical leap to talk about institutions as if they have a body, as if they can be corporeal, as if they can have the lived experience that a body would have. So let's just take an example for a minute and think about the ways that social institutions could be understood to be addicted. And we'll do a kind of a common sense comparison of institutions to what we commonly understand substance use disorders to be. Okay, so let's take the issue of money. Now, drug addicts will spend their very last dime on drugs. They will spend all their money. So too, social institutions spend lots and lots of money into the multiple billions of dollars a year to ensure that psychotropic drugs stay on the shelf and that they are freely available for population management. Okay, so that's money. What about control? So a drug addict essentially loses control over their own life. And in particular, they lose control over when and under what conditions they use. They lose control over that ability. So too, institutions have lost bureaucratic control over when they use drugs, for what reasons, for how long, and we see this pattern across institutions. Third, tolerance. Drug addicts often experience a phenomenon called tolerance, where the physiological effect of taking a drug wears off over time despite increased use. You become tolerant to it. So too, institutions have developed a kind of tolerance as well. They give more and more, ever more powerful drugs to persons, and they can't achieve the same effects that they once did. And lastly, quitting. You know you're dealing with an addict if they cannot walk away. Despite repeated efforts to stop using, they simply cannot. So too, many of our major social institutions have tried and tried and tried through regulation, through laws, through the application of science, to stop, to slow, to stem their use of psychoactive and psychotropic drugs in their populations. Those efforts have largely been unsuccessful. So let's consider 3 concrete cases where we can see this play out. The first is the military. Before 2003, you could not volunteer for the US military if you were taking a psychotropic drug, and you certainly would not be given one during your service if you needed one. Yet by 2010, some 7 years later, 20% of the 1.1 million active duty soldiers in the US military were taking some type of psychotropic drug. So how did we get there? With the US's invasion of the sovereign nation of Iraq, along with the coalition of the willing, as it was called in that time, the US military came to a point where they realized they needed more troops. They needed to conserve the fighting strength. And so they changed their long-standing policy forbidding people to volunteer if they were taking these meds, and they started shipping psychotropic drugs into the live war zone for the first time in US history. This is a dramatic shift. So rather than using psychotropic drugs to target the so-called enemy, our institution, in this case, is using the psychotropic drugs to transform the soldier so that they can then go fight the so-called enemy. The second case are nursing homes for our elders. Now, estimates vary, but between 25 and 50% of our elders in nursing homes and assisted care living facilities are taking a psychotropic drug. This is an astonishing figure because most of these cases of drugging do not involve proper psychiatric assessment or demonstrated medical need. One reputable study found that 25% of all drug doses among elders in these institutions had no valid medical basis whatsoever. Part of the reason why these practices have unfolded in our elder institutions is aggressive tactics on the part of drug companies. So in the largest fraud case in US history, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, which is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, paid a record $2.2 billion fine for civil and criminal liability when they were pushing an antipsychotic drug called Risperdal to treat elders with dementia. This is an off-label use. There's no evidence to support this particular practice, yet they had a vast system in place to ensure that elders would be taking these drugs, even though they shouldn't have been taking them. So back in 1987, Congress was already confronting a similar situation in elder homes, and they passed a series of laws and regulations that aimed to curtail this practice. This is in 87. Yet, through the 90s and the 2000s, with the rise of the era of the antidepressant and the second generation antipsychotic like Risperdal, Slowly but surely, our elder institutions got hooked again. Finally, the last case is immigrant detention. There's a special unit of ICE called aviation medicine, and they have a very specific task within the structure of ICE. They accompany persons who have been found to be in violation of U.S. civil law as they are deported from the United States. And aviation medicine, this unit, has developed a special cocktail of psychotropics to be administered via injection into the bodies of combative detainees. This pre-flight cocktail, as they call it, contains Ativan, Congentin, and Haldol, 3 powerful psychotropic drugs. It's very difficult to know exactly how many people have been subjected to this practice, but we do know that aviation medicine has accompanied thousands of persons in the process of deportation since 2003 when they were formed. What are we going to do about it? This is a real problem. And if, in fact, our institutions, our institutional bodies are addicted, if they are addicted, how are we going to help them into a process of recovery? How are we going to help them sober up? Because they need some sobering up. Now, the first step in a recovery process is accepting the fact that you have a problem and that the situation is completely out of control. While it is important for us to continue to focus on the American human drug problems that are real, problems with alcoholism, problems with cocaine, with amphetamines, with opiates, we cannot understand these problems outside of the institutional context in which they are unfolding. We have to consider America's institutional drug problems as well as its human drug problems. In fact, I don't think that you can solve the human drug problem without also simultaneously tackling the institutional drug problem. They are bound together, and you cannot solve them independently. The second thing that needs to be done to solve this institutional crisis, and this comes from the 12-step literature, is we have to do an inventory. We have to do a proper accounting of what is going on in these institutions. You see, custodial institutions are by their very definition closed institutions. They are closed off from society, and that closure not only encompasses the people who are forced to live there, it also encompasses the people who work there, but most importantly, it encompasses the information, the knowledge about what is actually going on behind those walls. Until we have full and open transparency of information, it will be very difficult to do a proper accounting of what these institutions are doing to our brothers and sisters. Another way of framing this entire conversation, and this is where I'll close, is in terms of our increasing reliance, our increasing dependence, we might even say our increasing addiction to technological solutions to what are fundamentally social problems. Psychotropic drugs are biotechnologies, and we are deploying them willy-nilly to solve problems that are not by their nature biological. They are fundamentally social. This is a problem in particular for societies like ours, for 2 reasons. First, by drugging people, we are taking our eye off the ball. We are taking our eye off the ball of the true nature of the problem, which is the more fundamental, deeper social disease of dislocation, inequality, and confrontation. And as long as we're drugging people, we're not paying attention to the root cause of the problem. The second reason why this is so important is that short-term technological fixes invariably involve the generation of unanticipated consequences, where the solution becomes a problem in and of itself. So what are the long-term unintended consequences of our technological dependence, our technological reliance, our technological addiction to the use of psychotropic drugs in social institutions. What are they? Well, until we sober up, unless we sober up, we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you.